the quiet suburban streets of Shady Oaks, a place where appearances are everything, a tragic event unraveled that would leave the community in shock. A woman who had everything allowed greed and jealousy to spiral out of control, leading to a crime so brutal, no one saw it coming. This is the story of Isabella Thompson, whose life of entitlement ended in murder. What were the dark secrets that led to such a horrific crime? Isabella Thompson had always known how to manipulate those around her. Growing up in an affluent household, she never had to struggle for anything. Her parents showered her with gifts, money, and attention, fulfilling every request she made. From a young age, she learned that life was easy when you demanded what you wanted. She never had to hear the word no. Her childhood was marked by luxury. Her father was a high-powered lawyer who worked long hours but made sure his family wanted for nothing. Her mother, a socialite, took pride in dressing Isabella in the finest clothes and ensuring she attended the best schools. Isabella excelled academically, but not because she was particularly interested in her studies. She simply wanted to outshine her peers. Everything she did was motivated by a desire to be envied. By the time she was an adult, this sense of entitlement was deeply ingrained in her personality. Her relationships often suffered because of her demanding nature. Friends came and went, some unable to keep up with her endless need for attention, while others grew tired of being used as stepping stones for her ambitions. When Isabella met Daniel in 2009, she saw him as the perfect husband. He was kind, hardworking, and stable. As an accountant, Daniel made a decent living, but his modest lifestyle was far from the extravagant world Isabella was used to. Despite this, she believed she could mold him into the type of husband she desired, one who would provide her with the same luxuries her parents had given her. However, what she didn't realize was that Daniel had different values. He was not someone who believed in excessive spending or giving in to every whim. In the early days of their marriage, Daniel tried to please Isabella. He bought her expensive gifts when he could, though they were nothing compared to what she was used to. As time passed, he began to push back against her demands. He saw how her constant desire for material things was draining both their finances and their relationship. By 2011, they had been married for 2 years, and their arguments had become more frequent. Isabella wanted more, and Daniel simply couldn't keep up. Isabella's frustration grew, especially when Daniel refused to buy her certain luxury items. She blamed him for not living up to her expectations, feeling that he should be able to provide her with the same kind of life her parents had. Their marriage, once filled with the excitement of newlywed life, was now strained, with Daniel struggling to meet her unreasonable demands. In May of 2011, the tension between them reached new heights. Veronica, Daniel's cousin, arrived for a visit from Tokyo. Veronica had become incredibly wealthy through her success in real estate, and her arrival brought a sense of unease to Isabella. From the moment she stepped off the plane, Veronica exuded a quiet confidence that made Isabella feel threatened. Veronica was everything Isabella wanted to be: rich, admired, and in possession of things Isabella could only dream of. During Veronica's stay, Isabella couldn't take her eyes off the necklace around Veronica's neck. It was a family heirloom, passed down from generation to generation. The necklace, with its intricate design and large gleaming diamonds, was the kind of luxury that Isabella felt she deserved. It was valued at $600,000, an amount far beyond anything Daniel could ever afford. The more Isabella saw Veronica wearing it, the more she wanted it. She believed the necklace would finally give her the status she craved. It would be the ultimate symbol of her superiority over others. As the days passed, her desire for the necklace grew into an obsession. She began to fantasize about how it would feel to wear it, imagining the envious looks she would get at social gatherings. Isabella started pressuring Daniel to buy it for her, knowing that he would likely refuse. She hinted at how the necklace would look perfect on her and how it was only fair that she should have it, given everything she had done to maintain their marriage. She reminded him of the promises he had made when they married, subtly implying that he wasn't fulfilling his role as her provider. Daniel, feeling the strain of their already fragile marriage, finally looked into the cost of the necklace. When he discovered the price, he was shocked. $600,000 was more than they had ever spent on anything. It was simply impossible for them to afford. He tried to explain this to Isabella, but she refused to listen. She grew angrier with each passing day. her obsession with the necklace becoming all-consuming. At night, she would lie awake, staring at the ceiling, thinking about the necklace. It became more than just a piece of jewelry. It was a symbol of everything she felt she was entitled to, but wasn't receiving from Daniel. Her frustration with him turned into resentment. She felt he was deliberately withholding the life she deserved, and in her mind, the necklace was the key to finally obtaining that life. As May turned into June, the tension in the house was palpable. Veronica, unaware of the growing conflict between Isabella and Daniel, continued to wear the necklace casually, unaware of the dark thoughts brewing in Isabella's mind. Isabella, on the other hand, could hardly contain her desire to take the necklace for herself. She began planning, thinking of ways she could possess the necklace without having to rely on Daniel. In her mind, it was hers already. All she had to do was find a way to make it a reality. By the night of June 10th, Isabella's obsession had reached its peak. She knew she couldn't wait any longer. She had to have that necklace, no matter what it took. Isabella had always been the type to find a way to get what she wanted, no matter the cost. After Daniel refused to buy her the necklace, she knew she couldn't let it slip through her fingers. By the beginning of June, her obsession had grown to the point where she couldn't think of anything else. She spent hours on the internet, searching for jewelers who could replicate the necklace, knowing that her plan had to be flawless. On June 3rd, 2011, after finding a jeweler who specialized in imitations, she contacted him, carefully instructing him on every detail of the necklace. Every curve, every diamond had to look identical to the original. By June 5th, the replica was in her hands. It was cheap but looked perfect to the naked eye, an exact copy of Veronica's heirloom. Isabella admired it under the dim light in her bedroom, comparing it to pictures she had taken of the original. The craftsmanship was impeccable, and she felt a surge of satisfaction. The plan was simple. She would swap the necklaces when no one was watching, and Veronica would never know. It seemed so easy, but Isabella didn't realize how much danger her obsession had created. The opportunity came just days later, on the evening of June 10th. It was a small gathering at their house, just Daniel, Veronica, and a few close friends. The evening started normally, with laughter and conversation flowing as everyone settled in. Veronica, as always, wore the necklace, its brilliance catching the light and drawing Isabella's gaze constantly. Isabella barely focused on the guests. Her mind was consumed with how she would make the swap. Her fingers itched with anticipation, and her heart raced as the evening progressed. At around 8:30 p.m., Isabella excused herself from the table, claiming she needed to freshen up. Veronica had left her purse in the bedroom, and Isabella saw her moment. She slipped into the room and opened the purse, carefully removing the original necklace. Her hands trembled slightly, but she forced herself to stay calm. She placed the fake necklace inside the purse and then quietly tucked the real one into her drawer. She had practiced this in her head for days, and it went just as smoothly as she imagined. But as she turned to leave the room, her heart stopped. Veronica was standing in the doorway. The look in her eyes told Isabella everything. Veronica knew exactly what had happened. Isabella could see the realization dawn in her cousin-in-law's face, and for the first time, panic surged through her. Veronica didn't say anything at first, but her presence alone sent a wave of fear crashing over Isabella. She could feel her pulse pounding in her ears, and her mind raced, thinking of ways to explain herself. But Veronica wasn't one to let things slide. She was sharp, quick to catch on, and Isabella knew she wouldn't just walk away without confronting her. The tension in the air was unbearable. The confrontation that followed was quick, but it was enough to push Isabella over the edge. She had never been caught in such a position before, her carefully crafted image in danger of crumbling. She had always been able to control her life, but now everything seemed to be slipping through her fingers. The reality of the situation hit her hard. Veronica would tell Daniel, and her entire life would unravel. The humiliation, the exposure, it was too much for Isabella to bear. In a sudden burst of rage and fear, Isabella acted without thinking. Her eyes darted to a heavy jewel box sitting on the dresser, and before she knew it, she grabbed it. She had no intention of killing Veronica, but her emotions were out of control. She struck Veronica over the head with all her strength. The sound of the blow was sickening, a heavy thud that seemed to echo in the small room. Veronica crumpled to the floor instantly, her body limp. For a moment, Isabella stood there, frozen in shock. She stared down at Veronica's lifeless form, her mind struggling to comprehend what had just happened. The jewel box, still gripped tightly in her hand, was smeared with blood. Everything around her felt surreal, as if time had slowed down. She didn't want to believe that Veronica was dead, but the stillness of her body told her otherwise. Isabella's mind raced again, but this time, it wasn't about how to get the necklace. It was about how to cover up what she had done. She dropped the jewel box and frantically dragged Veronica's body towards the closet. Her heart pounded wildly, her breathing shallow as she tried to think of what to do next. She shoved Veronica's body into the corner of the closet and slammed the door shut, hoping no one would notice anything for the rest of the night. Bloodstains on the floor caught her eye, and she quickly wiped them with a towel, trying to erase any evidence of what had just occurred. Every second felt like an eternity, but she knew she had to act fast. She couldn't let anyone know what had happened. Not now, not ever. By the time she finished cleaning up, it was close to 9 p.m. She returned to the dinner party, forcing a smile, pretending as if nothing had happened. Inside, she was terrified. The weight of her actions pressed down on her, but she refused to let it show. She had to keep up appearances, at least until she could figure out what to do next. When one of the guests casually mentioned that Veronica hadn't returned from the bedroom in a while, Isabella calmly explained that Veronica had been feeling unwell earlier in the evening. She told them that Veronica had complained of a headache and had gone to lie down in the guest room for some rest. It was a simple explanation, one that seemed believable under the circumstances, and the guests didn't question it further. But as the night wore on and Veronica still hadn't reappeared, a few glances were exchanged around the table. Isabella, feeling the growing pressure, suggested that Veronica must have fallen asleep and that they shouldn't disturb her. She even offered to check on her later, after everyone had left. As the guests finally began to leave around 11 p.m., Isabella's mind was still spinning. She had committed a murder, something she never imagined she would do, but now it was too late to turn back. She had crossed a line, and there was no way out. All she could do was hope that no one would discover the truth. But deep down, she knew it was only a matter of time. The evening of June 10, 2011, had ended in confusion and fear. After the guests left, Daniel noticed something odd. Veronica, always punctual and responsible, hadn't said goodbye before leaving. He assumed she had just gone outside without anyone noticing. But when he couldn't find her car in the driveway, a creeping sense of dread washed over him. He checked the house, calling for her, but there was no sign of her anywhere. As the minutes turned to hours, his worry grew. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. At first, Isabella stayed calm, acting as if nothing was unusual. She told Daniel not to worry and suggested that maybe Veronica had gone to a hotel or left earlier than expected. But Daniel knew his cousin well. Veronica would never leave without saying goodbye, especially when staying in town. As the hours passed, his concern turned to panic, and they finally decided to contact the police to report her missing. By the morning of June 11, 2011, the police arrived to begin their search. It was a quiet, humid day, and the sun had barely risen as officers combed through the Thompson household. Daniel, who hadn't slept all night, was pale with worry. He kept pacing through the house, unable to focus on anything but the mystery of Veronica's disappearance. Isabella, on the other hand, kept her distance, quietly watching the investigation unfold. To anyone else, she appeared composed, but inside, she was unraveling. It wasn't long before the search took a dark turn. At around 9:30 a.m., an officer entered Isabella and Daniel's bedroom to check for any signs of struggle. As he opened the closet door, he was hit with the unmistakable smell of death. Veronica's body was found crumpled in the corner of the closet, her lifeless form hidden beneath a pile of clothes. The officer called out for backup, and soon the house was swarming with forensic teams, investigators, and more police. Daniel's world shattered in that moment. He could hardly process what he was seeing. Veronica, dead in his own home. The shock overwhelmed him, and for a long time he stood frozen, staring at the closet as investigators pulled her body out, the full weight of the tragedy sinking in. He couldn't understand how this had happened under his own roof, in a house where he thought he was safe. His heart ached with guilt and disbelief. How could someone have murdered his cousin in their home, and how could he have not noticed? The police, now treating the case as a murder, began their investigation immediately. There were no signs of forced entry, no indication that anyone had broken into the house. which led them to the chilling conclusion that the killer was someone close to the family. As they pieced together the events of the evening, they interviewed Daniel and Isabella separately, trying to understand the timeline and uncover any suspicious behavior. While Daniel's shock and grief were evident, Isabella remained strangely composed. On June 12th, forensic teams made a discovery that would change the entire course of the investigation. During their examination of Veronica's belongings, they noticed something odd about the necklace she had been wearing. Upon closer inspection, they realized that it was a cheap replica, not the original family heirloom. This raised several questions. Why would someone go through the trouble of swapping the necklace? What was the motive behind this seemingly strange act? And how did it tie into Veronica's death? The fake necklace became a crucial clue. Investigators began to consider that the killer may have been someone who had a deep interest in the valuable necklace. They started to look more closely at the family's dynamics, focusing on relationships, financial situations, and personal motives. The police interviewed Isabella again, noting how calm and detached she seemed during the questioning. While Daniel was overcome with grief, Isabella's emotional distance stood out. By June 15th, Daniel was struggling to hold himself together. The pressure of the investigation weighed heavily on him, and the grief of losing Veronica was unbearable. At night, he would sit in silence, replaying the events in his mind, trying to make sense of how things had gone so wrong. He began to notice that Isabella was acting differently. She seemed overly interested in the details of the investigation, constantly asking about what the police had discovered. She monitored his phone calls with the detectives, listening closely, but never offering her own thoughts. Daniel also noticed that Isabella avoided talking about Veronica. Any mention of her seemed to make Isabella uncomfortable, and she would quickly change the subject. As the days passed, these subtle signs became more apparent, and Daniel's gut feeling grew stronger. Something wasn't right. He started to suspect that Isabella knew more than she was letting on. On June 18th, Daniel could no longer hold back his suspicions. His mind was racing, and the guilt of keeping silent weighed heavily on him. He went to the police and confessed what had been troubling him. He told them about Isabella's obsession with the necklace, how she had demanded that he buy it for her, and how angry she had been when he refused. He admitted that he wasn't sure if she was involved, but he couldn't ignore the strange behavior she had shown since the murder. The police, already considering the possibility that someone close to the family was involved, took Daniel's confession seriously. They began to focus their investigation on Isabella, looking into her recent activities, financial records, and personal connections. They also re-examined the timeline of the evening, noting that the fake necklace had been found in Veronica's bag, suggesting that someone had intended to steal the original. As the investigation deepened, it became clear that this was not a random act of violence. The police believed the killer had a personal motive, and with Daniel's confession about Isabella's obsession with the necklace, they were now closer than ever to uncovering the truth. The days between June 20th and June 28th, 2011, were critical in the investigation. The police, now fully focused on Isabella, began unraveling the life she had so carefully crafted. As they dug into her past, they found a pattern that was impossible to ignore. Isabella's history of entitlement was not new. It had followed her from childhood into her adult life. Growing up in a wealthy family had shaped her into someone who believed the world owed her everything. Her parents had always given in to her demands, and that expectation of constant indulgence carried over into her marriage with Daniel. When things didn't go her way, Isabella had a way of manipulating those around her, twisting situations to suit her needs. It became clear to detectives that her desire for the necklace was more than just an obsession with an object. It symbolized something deeper, her need to maintain a sense of superiority, to prove to herself and everyone else that she could have anything she wanted, no matter the cost. The necklace wasn't just jewelry to her. It was a trophy, a sign that she was still in control of her life, despite her deteriorating marriage. The discovery of the fake necklace had put her on their radar, but now the detectives needed to find concrete proof. On June 25th, detectives interviewed the jeweler who had made the replica necklace. His account added another piece to the puzzle. He confirmed that Isabella had approached him in early June, asking for a detailed imitation of a family heirloom, a necklace with diamonds that sparkled like the real thing. He remembered her clearly, how specific she had been about the design, how insistent she was that it looked identical to the original. His statement gave the police the confirmation they needed that Isabella had planned the swap long before the murder occurred. With this information, the police began building their case. By June 30th, they had obtained a search warrant for Isabella's home. The search was thorough, and when they opened her dresser drawer, there it was, the original necklace, carefully hidden under layers of clothes. The discovery of the real necklace was the final piece of evidence. It not only linked Isabella to the crime, but also confirmed that her actions were premeditated. This wasn't a crime of passion, as they had initially considered. It was a cold, calculated plan to steal what she couldn't have. On July 2, 2011, Isabella was arrested. The arrest took place early in the morning, just as the sun was rising over the quiet suburb. Isabella, who had always been in control of her image, tried to maintain her composure, but the weight of the situation was evident. She was no longer the poised, entitled woman who always got her way. The police presented her with the evidence: the fake necklace, the testimony from the jeweler, and the original necklace found in her home. At first, she denied everything, insisting that she had nothing to do with the crime. But the mounting evidence was impossible to ignore. Slowly, as the hours passed, Isabella broke down under the pressure. The realization that her life of privilege and control had crumbled was too much to bear. The truth finally came out, piece by piece. Her arrest shocked the community. Isabella had always presented herself as someone who had everything together, a woman who lived in luxury, whose life was perfect on the outside. But behind closed doors, she was someone else entirely. The facade had been shattered, and now everyone saw the truth. Her desperation to hold on to an image of wealth and power had driven her to murder. The consequences were inescapable. As the trial approached, the case garnered widespread media attention. The story of the entitled woman who had killed her cousin-in-law over a necklace captivated the public. People couldn't believe that such a trivial object could lead to such a brutal act. But for Isabella, the necklace represented far more than just jewelry. It was the symbol of everything she had ever wanted and everything she thought she deserved. The trial began on October 5, 2011. The courtroom was filled with tension as the prosecution laid out their case. They painted a clear picture of a woman consumed by greed and envy who had planned to steal the necklace from Veronica long before the murder occurred. The prosecution highlighted Isabella's history of manipulation, her upbringing of privilege, and her obsession with maintaining a life of luxury. They showed the jury how the fake necklace had been crafted, how it was swapped during the dinner party, and how the original was found hidden in Isabella's drawer. Every detail was carefully presented, making it clear that this was no accident. It was a premeditated crime. Isabella sat in the courtroom, her face emotionless, as the details of her life were picked apart piece by piece. The defense tried to argue that the murder had been a crime of passion, that Isabella had acted in the heat of the moment. But the evidence of the necklace swap proved otherwise. The prosecution showed how the murder had been the result of a calculated plan to take what she wanted at any cost. Throughout the trial, Daniel remained a broken man. The discovery that his wife had not only killed his cousin, but had also deceived him in such a calculated way left him devastated. He had once loved Isabella, but now he could hardly look at her. His testimony, though brief, revealed the strain their marriage had been under and how Isabella's demands had driven them apart. He confessed how she had obsessed over the necklace, how she had demanded he buy it, and how in the end he could never have imagined that her desire would lead to murder. On October 20th, 2011, after weeks of testimony, the jury reached their verdict. They found Isabella guilty of first-degree murder. The courtroom was silent as the verdict was read, and Isabella's expression remained blank, but her eyes told a different story. She knew that her life, once filled with luxury and privilege, was over. There would be no more control, no more demands. She had lost everything. Isabella was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The sentence marked the end of a life built on entitlement and manipulation. The woman who had once believed she could have anything she wanted was now trapped in the consequences of her own greed. As she was led away in handcuffs, the reality of her actions finally settled in. There was no escape, no going back. Daniel was left to pick up the pieces of his shattered life. His cousin was dead, and his wife was gone forever, locked away for a crime driven by greed and obsession. The once quiet suburb of Shady Oaks would never forget the dark events that unfolded in the Thompson household. A chilling reminder of how envy can lead to unimaginable consequences. What will become of Daniel left in the wake of tragedy? Will the scars of betrayal and loss ever heal, or is the damage too deep? To be very honest, we may never know, and like this case, we also have some cases where it seems like the victim deserved the grisly end sentenced upon them, like the case where a teenage boy has an affair with 3 older neighbors and it ends badly. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and watch this interesting case so you see how it happened.